Hey everyone, welcome to the Love You Wealth podcast. I'm Gary Seelhorst, executive wellness coach and drug development researcher. And I am joined by my wonderful, amazing, and talented co-host, Cesar Marin. How you doing, Cesar?
Gary, thank you so much. Welcome everybody to the Love You Wealth podcast, where we reframe what wealth is, right? As parents, as fathers, how to search for wealth, not just in your dollar signs and in your bank account, but wealth in the time you spent with your family, the time you spent with your partner, the time you spent with yourself. So welcome to the show. Gary, we have quite a guest today.
Yeah, definitely. It's Dr. Hemal Patel. I got to state here right off the bat that I'm a little bit of a fanboy. Hopefully I'm not too excited, but just excited enough anyway. So Dr. Patel is a researcher from UC San Diego. It's my alma mater, another reason why I'm so excited. But Dr. Patel has really pushed a lot of the bounds in some of the research that he's been doing lately with mitochondrial health. Really interesting stuff as, you know, potential biomarker that could be utilized as another vital sign at this point. But the way that I actually met Dr. Patel is a little differently, and it was through a documentary that was recently released through the Joe Dispenza meditation retreat. And it's called Source. It's Within You. Very compelling documentary. And that was something that was in a sequence of events was really interesting because I'm relatively new in this space, kind of, you know, coming from the pharmaceutical development world. But what was very compelling about his role in the documentary was, I don't know if you guys watch a lot of these documentaries, but I seem to always kind of identify with someone who's in that documentary, and what makes it compelling for me is really how, so I view the role that person plays in a lot of these different types of documentaries. And coming from the role of research that I played in the pharmaceutical industry, we're always looking for ways to really validate and to essentially control for a lot of the variables that we're looking to research. And that was really the role that Hemal had played when he was researching this new area of meditation and really the value that it brings. And so that's something that you can talk about a little bit, Hemal, and then we can kind of just take it from there.
Yeah, it's great to see you guys.
Yeah.
I was just in Park City this past weekend with the folks from Inner Science that helped to sort of make this documentary come alive. We actually had a showing at the library in Park City, and then did a great dinner in the evening with some auction kinds of stuff to raise money for research. And this has really been sort of the big space, right? That lots of modalities exist out there where people are trying to figure out, how does mind impact body? And in most of these things, people tend to fixate here. And so our thought was, we know this changes when you're contemplating, when you're meditating, doing the other things. The work with Joe and Toby Muller-Bertram really goes to this next level of thinking about how this changes the rest of who you are. And this has been our focus, to really do a deep dive. We've worked with Dr. Joe for 5 years now. And it was sort of an interesting start, right? We started during the pandemic. The first event we did was February of 2020, and then the world sort of shut down in March of 2020. The samples were sitting in my freezers for a number of months, and then we finally got around to them and saw some really cool stuff around COVID. This is a paper that we published a few years back around this idea that a meditator going into their meditative space can actually change their blood biology to be more resistant to a virus, right? And COVID in particular. And we're able to show a unique blood factor that a meditator elevates in response to this. And this ties back to what, you know, I'm a card-carrying pharmacologist as well. This idea that people develop drugs around some of these endogenous things that show up. And we're really looking at how the body and the mind can create an instrument within ourselves that we have the power to do, both from a thought perspective, but also from a biochemical, biological perspective. And so that's been the deep dive we've been on for the past 5 years, is to figure out what truly is the potential of the mind to manipulate and change the body in a positive directionality. And it's been an amazing discovery phase, right? Just looking at all kinds of things. And there's nothing you ever get sick of looking at, because there's just amazing things that show up every time we look for something.
Yeah, and one of the things that I wanted to sort of impress upon why I was compelled by your role in a lot of this is really your role as a true researcher, as someone who really came in with no axe to grind, really no baggage, no special interests. In your involvement in it was really more someone who would help legitimize the research that's going on versus, I remember back in the days when I was studying CNS medications, and it's always, how do you feel, what's your mood, how did you sleep, a lot of these really subjective measures that can change wildly throughout the course of the study based on things that might not necessarily be indicative of the efficacy. And when you came in, you said, look, if you want me to be involved in this, we're going to do gold standard types of biomarkers. We're going to do functional MRI. We're going to look at these blood panels and everything else that's quantifiable. And I'm sure there was some hemming and hawing in the beginning of it, but in the end, that was the real value of, I think, what the research was, and understanding those different results as you were starting to uncover a lot of these data.
Yeah.
So and that at that point, that's where I really locked into you in the documentary, and I said, well, I see why they brought this guy, and this is, you're originally from the Department of Anesthesiology, but your role in this as a researcher, I think, was really what helped people to understand what's happening structurally in the body. Is that fair to say?
It is. I mean, I think the world of science is really complicated. I mean, you live that life as well, and there's lots of different types of scientists. The majority of these are, and I think science has this, right? That you have to be a healthy skeptic, but not to the point where you have this mindset that if you can't know it, that it doesn't exist, which is what some of these extreme scientists look. And so I have a healthy skepticism, but I have an open mind, right? Some of the things I think up in my brain, no one believes, and they're really far out kinds of things that you then eventually get to do because you're doing crazy studies and experiments that finally prove them out. And this has been the great space that we've been in with Joe, is this really ability to explore broadly our different areas.
Yeah, and I think one of the really important parts of what's coming out of a lot of your work and understanding really the how to measure the mitochondrial health, I think is I'm hoping it's going to be something that's really groundbreaking, and looking, like, as you've mentioned in the past, that it could be another vital sign. And a lot of what I do with executive coaching is I'm a big believer of, if you measure it, it tends to get better, because then you start to really dial into the things that are the factors of getting you to that point. And if we do have this biomarker that you're now involved in, I think that's really a good starting point on what are the things that can really get you to a point of quote unquote mitochondrial health. And maybe you can kind of talk a little bit about some of that research.
Yeah, so I mean, mitochondria are things that I've been involved in and interested in since I was a graduate student, right? As a PhD student, my thesis was focused on how to protect the heart from ischemic injury. So when you have a heart attack, how do you protect that tissue from dying? And typically it's massive enough that stem cells can't fix it, because you get a huge loss of that volume of tissue. And so what was discovered in the late 80s, mid 80s, was this idea of preconditioning, that you could subject the heart to a small amount of injury and let it recover, and it would have this sort of preconditioning effect where it would know what to expect when it had that massive injury. And then when you subsequently do that massive injury, the heart doesn't die, right? And so there's an endogenous mechanism that imprints in the heart with this sort of early exposure with this late exposure. It goes back, I was a philosophy religion major in college, and so I bring that into things we do. And so Nietzsche said, which doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And that idea permeates through biology. This idea that our inner systems have this adaptability if we could just figure out how to unlock it. And so this is what we were doing back in my grad school days, is trying to figure out how then, as a pharmacologist, how could we coax this without having to create injury, but add pharmacological agents to this. And it turns out the calculus in all of this, and the heart is one of these organs. 30% of the volume of the heart is mitochondria. And so if you're going to preserve that thing from dying, you have to maintain and establish energetic pathways, and they have to be active, right? And so this is the big thing that happens during heart attack, is you deprive that tissue of oxygen and nutrients, and that energy decline goes down very rapidly. And then when you reperfuse or give that blood and oxygen back to that heart, it's too much. It doesn't know what to do with it. And you create free radicals and other things that all tie back to mitochondrial functionality. So it's been a part of my scientific existence since I started in the science world, this balance of how you create energy. When I came to UCSD in 2002, we started exploring these paths in unique kinds of ways as well. And the real relationship we were looking at is how the membrane regulates metabolism in a cell. And it turns out that the membrane is in very close proximity to mitochondria, and this relationship matters. And so we were able to create lots of ideas around this, lots of grant funding through the VA, through the NIH, foundations and other things around this idea of the membrane and mitochondrial symbiosis that happens. And mitochondria become this conduit. As we advanced, I've been here now 23 years, and we built sort of this lab that was very collaborative and interacted with lots of other groups on campus. People wanted to look at this in human populations. And so the gold standard in this space has always been a muscle biopsy. So you come into a research facility like UCSD, we numb your leg up, we take this gigantic needle, shove it into that muscle, pull it out, some muscle comes out. That then ends up in a lab like mine, and then we can look at lots of different aspects of your mitochondrial function, from functionality to structure and all these other things. It takes forever to do. It takes about 6 hours of a run to look at a couple samples. And so you can literally do maybe a handful of these a week. So there's no way to commercialize and scale this. And so the idea was, how do we bring this to the masses? How do we get this to the point of a vital sign? Right now, at this sort of gold standard, it sits as a research tool, but not everyone and their mother has access to this as a vital sign. And so and sort of, discovery comes out of this sort of pie in the sky sort of necessity that gets validated. So NASA was doing the study on the identical twins. So one twin went up into space for a year, and his counterpart, the senator from Arizona, was on ground for a year. They wanted to look at how the human body is impacted by long duration microgravity. The idea is this becomes the grounding for what happens when humans start to explore space, go to Mars and other places. There's other challenges that Mars poses in terms of radiation and other things that don't really happen when you're in high sort of altitude orbit. But it is that microgravity component. So NASA's challenge to us, so UCSD was one of 10 sites picked. My good friend Brenda Rana was the site PI at UCSD. She knows all the crazy cool stuff we do in my lab, and so she reached out and said, would you want to be involved in this project looking at some element of mitochondrial biology? And so the challenge that NASA had is, we know that mitochondria degrade in space. We just don't know where, when, or how, right? Could you come up with a test to allow us to look at this? And like, yeah, if you can get us tissue samples, we can easily set this up. Like, all right, so that's the limit. We can't give you tissue samples because this guy's in space. We don't know how to get you fresh samples that day. I mean, Elon Musk is pretty good with these rockets, but you can't do this on an hour basis, right? Timescale doesn't exist. And you can't freeze the sample, so that creates this huge barrier. And the fact that you'd have to poke stuff up in space doesn't bode well. So what they said is, what we can give you is plasma. So we can give you blood plasma. Could you come up with a test based on this? And so I thought about this for a while, and what we came up with was this concept of your plasma is a biochemical capture of who and what you are. So it is a consequence of your genetics, of your mitochondria, of your microbiome, of your exposure to an environment, right? And this astronaut being exposed to microgravity becomes, all of this feeds into that biochemistry. Most blood tests will look at one or two elements of that blood. They'll look at a marker that goes up or down and basically peg your functionality based on that. We didn't want to do that, right? That creates a lot of bias in sort of the endpoint. So what we did is we invented a test where we actually have a living biology. We have a cell that's growing in our dishes, and we take that captured environment from that plasma and we adoptively transfer the entire thing onto this living cell, and we see how that cell's mitochondrial behavior changes. By doing this, we can then now start to track the mitochondrial functionality of this cell as a consequence of this biochemistry. You can literally buy cells that represent every organ of the body. And so we could essentially do a human on a plate assay, and we were able to predict unique time points in flight. when there would be issues with skeletal muscle dysfunction, immune dysfunction, endothelial dysfunction. And so the thought was, now we have a thing that can actually launch, right? You can go to Quest or LabCorp and get a blood draw, and this blood draw could come into our facility, but it still creates a barrier. It's not the barrier of living up in high altitude space and getting a sample back through a rocket, but it still requires a human to leave their house and go interact with someone. And most of us, even though we should be social, don't want to do that. We want things to come to our house that we have full time and control over. And so what we've done is we've miniaturized this NASA type sort of initial endeavor into a blood card based technology. And so basically you get a kit that comes to your house when you order this test. You poke your finger, 4 to 6 drops of blood on this card. The card migrates out the serum into this second space. The card then essentially dries and it's stable for months at room temperature. So there's no shipping issues with cold storage or anything like that. You put it into a desiccated pouch, put it in the mail, it comes to us. When it comes to our facility, we punch the serum out and do essentially the NASA type assay. We can transfer your biochemical environment that we've captured as a consequence of everything that's happening to you with everything that you're doing, whether it's health or disease or all these other things, and get a reflection of what's happening inside your body and your mitochondria. And this becomes really now a scalable way where globally someone could really assess their mitochondria. And this is what we're really after. Giving people the power to see this tool that everyone's been talking about, right? Mitochondria are what allow us to thrive, live, and they're also what allow us to go into demise. It's when your mitochondria stop working that you die, essentially. And so now we have a tool to look at that.
And it was impressed upon me, I think, when we were at that last reception, you were starting to talk about it a little bit more, and other folks they heard the words that you were speaking to them, and the first question to a lot of them was, oh, I remember the mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell, and they're going back to, high school biology at that point, and they're kind of seeing it come full circle as something that's very new and interesting, that's really going to help them understand kind of what their status of true health is. And that's, I think, probably the hope of a lot of us that are seeing this as a lot of these new tests come out and become hopefully more and more in the mainstream. But speaking of the reception, if you don't mind me stepping back a little bit and talking about how you and I met, I'm going to probably gush over you a little bit, so stand by. But there was a really interesting sequence of events where I think I was telling you about how I first came upon the documentary. I was at that dinner where I was sitting right next to your colleague, Dr. Toby.
Mm-hmm.
And Toby, he's hard to miss. He's got the hair flowing,
nice
he's
hair,
the German accent and everything. And he's got all these really interesting, really opinions about healthcare in general as a practicing physician too, which, I think it was tickling everyone's fancy who was there. And so I was lucky enough to sit right next to him, and he started talking about his work on the Joe Dispenza, the documentary specifically, and then pointed me to the actual documentary. I watched it. I was like, wow, I was looking for him the whole time, and then I got sidetracked by how sort of seduced I was with your role and everything as this true researcher. And then it was literally, I think, a week and a half later that I saw you, and I came up to you at the reception, and I was like, oh my gosh, it's you. And you, I don't know if you're quite ready for that kind of a response from someone like me, but that was kind of interesting. I don't know if you get a whole lot of that. Maybe when you're...
It's crazy. I think the Joe community is dramatically growing. So interestingly, I was on my flight home from Salt Lake City this weekend, and I'd been, I manifest first class upgrades. And so it happened about 30 minutes before the flight. I got this first class upgrade.
There you go.
And 2 women sitting behind me had seen me speak in Vienna at a retreat. And it was like this instant connection, right? They see you, and all that data and the stuff we talk about comes rushing back to them. And I'm getting more and more of this. And I think Toby's getting more and more of this as well, that there is a large community that knows about this work, and we'd like to make it even larger. I mean, the goal is to really, with Inner Science and with Dr. Joe, is to make this a worldwide kind of thing, that people in every corner of the world know what the power of that individual is and what your potential is.
Yeah. And I think, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Gary, go.
Well, I was going to say, so, the thrust behind this podcast is really, it's a lot of fatherhood, presence, and legacy. And and you're obviously creating this really significant legacy and this shift in how we're looking at healthcare in general, which is it's very cool to be a part of, I'm sure, and you get a lot of value and affirmation a lot from what you're doing, and maybe you can talk a little bit about how you yourself sort of stay grounded as a father and maybe as a scientist as well.
Yeah, it was sort of interesting. My middle child was with me at a retreat a couple of years ago, and she couldn't understand why people kept looking at me and coming up to me because I present
You're
and
just dad.
you have that thing. And she asked someone on the research team, she's like, I don't understand why my dad's so important. I don't know why do all these people want to talk to him. It just seems stupid and silly, right? And so I think there's that element of this that I really try to keep my home and work life separate. It's hard, right? They get exposed to a lot of the things we work on. We'll talk about a lot of the things that I'm doing, and I'm always working, right? And so they always see that constant element of that workspace. But this is something that I've struggled with, right? Is how do you find this balance of really creating time with family and then maintaining this high sort of profile we have in terms of the research and things that we're doing? And it was the same way before I met Joe, and it's the same way since we've met Joe, and all of these other things have come on. Time is a commodity, and I think, one of the things I struggle with as a parent is, and my wife keeps me grounded as well. I'm the only PhD in a family of MD, so all the kids became MDs, and so my wife's a pediatrician. She decided to leave clinical practice and now teaches at the medical school because that's really sort of her passion and her connection. But her sense is that is probably a bigger skeptic than I am about the things, right? And so always challenging whether this is really how I want to spend my time and do the things that I want to do. And it's important to have that backdrop. And one of the questions she always asks is, when you're dead, and this is something one certainty that we have in our life is we will die, right? How do you want your kids to remember you? Do you want them to remember you as the guy who sat in the office and worked all the time so that they had all this money to do all the things that they want? Or do they want to remember you as someone who has these fond memories of things you did with them, right? These experiences and activities and foods and other experiences that you provided to them. And I would love to be the latter, but I think right now I'm more of the former in terms of how I think my kids would see me, and it's a challenge, I think, for people at certain ages in their group. But we'll see where it goes.
Yeah, I think with a lot of the different things that, so as an executive coach, I'm always thinking about performance, and it's not necessarily always physical or mental. I mean, that factors into a lot of it. But now I think there's a way to gauge a lot of this through mitochondrial health, where you can look at it, and it really is a cellular parameter that can be measured at this point. And when you go back to a lot of the different things that happen in your life, that where some of my clients are, they might have burnout, or they might have certain things that just kind of get them a little bit sidetracked. We can now start to look at these as, different types of parameters that they can measure to see when you are in these different valleys, when you're going through this roller coaster of life. How are you from a health perspective? And now we can kind of point to this very specifically. And I was, 2 years ago, I didn't really know this world a whole lot. And now a lot of my friends from the life sciences world are looking at me as, like, Gary, you've got this new lexicon. You're kind of in this really hippy dippy world now. And this is really something that brings you back to, there's science behind this now. It's not really just a different set of terms that we're using, but there's actual research that backs this, from a very, very specific standpoint. Even when I was fanboying over you at the reception, I was asking you about, like, wow, how are you, how are you conducting your life now? And you're like, well, as a researcher, I still don't really meditate. I'm not into psychedelics or anything like that. And then I kind of struggle with that myself, as we were kind of talking before this about, meditation is a skill, and it's something that you really need to practice in order to get good at. But not everyone's going to do it as amazingly as everyone else, based on how you kind of approach it and how you've incorporated it into your daily life. And there are different machinations of meditation, and it's not just one thing, but it's really just having a tool that helps you to kind of pull back and be a little bit more present. Are there things that you do specifically that get you to that sort of position of presence.
Yeah, I mean, I did a. Go ahead.
No, I was going to ask, the meditation, the mindfulness, how can that change, and perceive the way we cultivate wealth, right? The way we cultivate wealth as in health and love and presence.
Yeah, I think that's an important question, right? One of the things that there's lots of different types of meditation. I don't know if Joe and I've had lots of conversations around this, as well as Toby, is I don't know if what he does is actually meditation. I think you leave that behind in the first couple hours of an event, and it's an experience that you have to have for yourself. I can't find the words to describe what happens at a week-long event. It is transformative, it's cathartic, it really expands your brain, it gives you this tool set that you can't get any other way. And Joe's done it masterfully, right? He's put this event together in such a unique, amazing kind of way that it leads people to this transformative change. We're seeing this in the data sets that we see in thousands of people. We see these things. The goal is to figure out sort of how it's happening, right? Is there a component of the week that creates this unique phenotype and this unique change? But at the ultimate goal far end is what's actually happening to this individual. I went through this in 2021, right? And one of the things that I was sort of dealing with is it had been many years, less than a decade, but it was still sort of fresh in my mind and reflective. My mother had passed away suddenly. And it was a shock to my existence, knowing that this person who I spent a lot of time interacting with, we would talk on the phone every day, just about stupid stuff, right? How's the weather? What'd you eat? Those kinds of things. But it was a routine and a unique part of my life that I enjoyed it. And we had this amazing relationship. She was this phenomenal cook, and all of those memories that sort of tie with that element. And she was my spiritual center, right? I had this notion that there existed something beyond who and what I was, but it was my mom that really sort of centered that for me. And for that to be lost, I really struggled for a lot of years. I don't think I was sort of whole, or I don't know if I still am. And so in this first week-long retreat that I had, I think this is what I processed. I cried the whole week. It was a unique element, and it really allows you to self-regulate and do these unique kinds of things. One of the goals of mastering this, and I don't know if you ever master it or when you do master it, and practice makes perfect, right? The more you do this, the more events you go to, the more experiential aspects you have with this, you get better and better. And I jokingly said this thing about this first class sort of manifestation, but this is what you learn to do as you think about things that you want, whether they're materialistic and stupid things like a first class thing, or whether you want this better interaction and relationship with your children, your spouse, and other things. And that mental energy you put into that, it turns out it actually happens eventually, right? This idea of putting that thought forward creates this change in your life. And I've been trying to manifest a positive relationship with my wife and kids for a long time. I've got more work to do. I'm just not that good, right? That's sort of the task I have.
All of us.
Right.
And I know the things to do, and there's certain times where I'm so lucid in my thinking that I can do it. But most of the time, the world gets in the way, and there's a pressure of a deadline or some email I have to respond to or some phone call I have to take that then detracts from that. And I think one of the things I'm going to try to sort of focus on over the next year is how can I use these meditative tools that Joe has endowed in my training around this space to really look at this. How can I be present and do one of these things? The thing that I've been telling people, and I tell my wife this now as well, is I plan things on my calendar. So my calendar exists, but I don't really think about my calendar until about 20 minutes before I actually have to do something. So I'm always only 20 minutes ahead. Right? Most of us live in this thing where we're focused on next week or the week after or the next year. We're in a space where we're trying to predict what's going to happen with all the stuff that's happened in the past. It doesn't work very well, right? Others of us are constantly stuck in this past. We can't get beyond all the things that someone wronged us or this trauma and this guy cut me off on the road, and you constantly start thinking about that. Neither of those places really get you to be who and what you are and really expand and grow in a unique kind of way. It's this present moment, and this is what I think the meditative world teaches you, is to be in this space. Psychedelics do it as well, but I think that's cheating. I think you're using a tool that you have a tool, right? You have this mind that's capable of doing this. And we see this in some of the fMRI studies that we've done, is if you really practice well during this week, you can actually put your mind into the same state as you can as if you're taking an exogenous agent that creates this psychedelic-like experience. That's profound to me that we
Mm-hmm.
have this innate
Mm-hmm.
power to create this behavior and at zero cost, right? There's no toxicity when you do it with your mind. There may be some toxicities as pharmacologists when you ingest something, you just never know. There's something that could happen on the
Yeah.
side.
Yeah, and I
And
think
so the
one of
power of that body, right?
yeah, exactly, and I want to go back to one of the comments that you made about self-regulating with a lot of the practice in meditation or the things that sort of get us to that point. And I agree, like meditation, I think takes different forms, and I really like to bring up very concrete examples of how that can affect us. And one specific example from me specifically is going back a few years back when my kids were little. I was traveling a bunch, everything was going crazy, and then I eventually was going through a divorce. I had a panic attack, and it was right before I ended up having a heart attack.
Hmm.
And two, definitely, these very significant things that happened in my life. And I hadn't really had any of those symptoms for years afterwards. And for the last year, I've been practicing meditation. Again, I haven't mastered it in the least of terms, but I mean, it's just going through the practice of actually pulling yourself back and being more present instead of, like you were saying before, really, like thinking about stuff that happened in the past versus, things that are happening that are giving you some kind of fear and anxiety in the future. And so kind of fast forward to a couple weeks ago, my son, he's a great athlete. He's a football player and a lacrosse player. He's a sophomore in high school. He's getting a lot of these looks from recruiters now, which is really, really fun and interesting. And then one day he hurts his ACL, he tears it, and in an instant, I'm walking over right afterwards to the PT's table, and I see him kind of doing the knee test on it. And my daughter just went through this whole thing, so I
Yeah.
know the drill.
Hmm.
And it really started to impress upon me how much this is really going to set him back in his recruiting exploits and what's going to happen for him in the future. Gosh, he's an athlete. His identity is an athlete. Now, what does this do to him? And I started thinking about in the future, and I started to kind of feel these sort of panic attacky kind of symptoms, and I pulled myself back. So his mom was running up. She was kind of going nuts. You could tell he was getting really upset. Other people were coming up to him, his coaches and his friends were, you could tell that there was a lot of nervousness in their eyes. And I was able to pull myself back out of what this funk was that seemed like it was leading to another panic attack. And I was like, okay, I got to be the strong one here. And I've been through this, especially with my daughter and understanding what we need to do from here on in. I'm thinking to myself, I'm actually the perfect person to kind of sit there, get him centered and figure out where to go from here.
Yeah.
And that was a very, very powerful feeling for me.
Yeah.
To really have this, the wherewithal to actually pull yourself out of this fear and anxiety of what was going to happen in the future and be the one that was able to kind of sit and understand exactly how to respond to that situation so that other people look to me for cues, and I'm calm
Mm-hmm.
and dealing with it. And it was just one of these scenarios. And I know Cesar has anecdotes that we kind of have traded as well because of his journey in the last couple of years as well. So, I mean, maybe there's some other anecdotes that you could share, Cesar.
And you said it's about being your conscious, right? Not being your thoughts. You could have gotten there and said, okay, this is going to happen. This is going to happen. You know what I mean? Now he's not going to be recruited now. Or you could have been your conscious. That, okay, let me take a deep breath. Let me sort of relax. Let me analyze the situation and see where we go from here. And I wanted to ask Dr. Patel, what are daily things that people can do to really have that mindfulness? I mean, like we talked about it earlier, right? Meditation, sometimes, we have this sense of, I don't have time. I really don't have time to meditate. Well, there's 1,400 minutes during the day. You got to find 10 minutes to at least find some time to quiet down your mind. But other practical things that we can do, that we can use, on that daily basis to find ourselves in that state like Gary did, where it wasn't like, you know what I mean? I'm going to let my thoughts take over, but I'm going to let my mindfulness take over.
And I think it comes down to what I would call perspective and what I think Joe would call this idea of these infinite potentials that exist, right?
Mm-hmm.
Most of us as parents objectify our kids and think of them as this athlete or this or that, but they're way more complex than that, right?
What I did.
That
Yeah.
your
Yeah.
son is more than his knee. He is an individual that's got a mind
Yeah.
that can
So
do
true.
other things, right? And so it's this idea that not to say that this was fate or intentional or potential or driven, but there's a reason why things happen. Right? I believe in God and sort of this existence outside of myself. And I believe that all of us have a plan, right? That something, and we're designed to do certain things.
Hmm.
From that perspective, what happened to your son had to happen because there is a design for him that's bigger than that aspect of what he was
Yeah.
supposed to do.
And it was amazing how I went right to the sentiment that you're talking about as well, because honestly, my son has kind of had a pretty breezy life at this point. He's always been really big and tall and handsome and a great athlete, and he's been the popular kid. And this is a moment in time where he can really kind of sit back and take stock in where he is with everything that's kind of happened to him and go through something that's really going to help him to understand adversity and understanding that this is where I'm actually going to go through something that I've never gone through before, and perhaps I can be a model to some of the other people that have seen me go through this. And now I'm a rehab patient. You know, I'm someone who's going to be in their corner as I go through this. This is a different role I have to play, and as I've kind of mentioned in some of my LinkedIn posts, you know, this is doing hard things is what kind of expands the anterior mid-cingulate cortex in your brain. These are opportunities for us to do things that are much different than we did at one point. And I think of the time that I met Bethany Hamilton at our church when she was talking. This is right on the heels of Soul Surfer, the movie that came out. And what was impressed upon me, she was a fantastic surfer before this, and she was going up through the pro ranks and everything. And then this happened to her. And then she obviously had to be, this is a big pivot. And there were a couple different things that she could do at that point. She could, just be a regular person and be a student and carry on with her life. Or she could really dig in and use this as a platform for what she eventually became, which was a spokesperson for what happened to her, how faith and God helped her through it. And at the end of it, she said, and by the way, if that shark didn't bite my arm off, I wouldn't be here speaking to you today. And that was really when it kind of hit me right in the heart. And it's exactly kind of what you're talking about, where this was meant to be. This is a moment
Yeah.
where I think he is actually going to learn from this and become such a different and more interesting person for having gone through that.
Yeah. And
And
again, there is that power of the body to heal, right? And this was a challenge. And I mean, if he mentally focuses, there is that potential to create this healing. And that's his journey, right? To figure out how his mind can really change his body in a unique way as well.
I was going to ask that, like the potential of the mind to help the body heal is incredible.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
it's a black box, yet there's this massive potential to change everything about who and what we are. We see this in the research. I mean, we do some tracking of facial expressions and things like that, and you completely transform inside out. Your biochemistry changes, your facial expressions change. One of the things that comments I get every time is, you look way younger than the last time I saw you. I'm like, I don't feel that way, or I don't perceive myself that way. And I think it's in that person who, if we're constantly looking at each ourselves in the mirror, we don't see that change. But someone who sees us as here and then 4 or 5 months later, they see that drastic difference because our visual perception, our mind is sort of locking in on a daily kind of minutia kind of thing, right? And so it's the potential of the mind to change the body is one of the things I think I never appreciated, and I think I've come to a completely different appreciation of that concept.
yeah. And I
No,
think
and not just change it, but heal it. No, I mean,
Yeah,
because
heal it in dramatic ways, right? I mean, lots of diseases that society faces right now are diseases of the mind, right? Mental health disorder is growing and huge. Anxiety, depression, PTSD, these are things that exist at a really high level. And the mind has that ability to do this, but we're also starting to look at chronic diseases, right? Diabetes, cancer, neurological things, neurodegenerative kinds of things. The mind has that potential to heal in a unique kind of way. We tend to, and I'm a total fan of pharmacology as well, but at the end of the day, if you could eat well, if you could exercise, get outside, get some sun, and sleep, you'd be pretty well off, I think. And
yeah,
most of us mess
yeah,
those four things up.
yeah, and I think
it's
that
not that hard.
yeah, one of the things that you right usually try to provide sort of practical implementation practices that from this podcast. And that I was going to ask, as we start to look at mitochondrial health, what are the things that move the needle a little bit? You just kind of talked about a few of these things, and it's really
Yeah.
kind of the definition of functional wellness that really moves us from from being of poor mitochondrial health to moving in that right direction. Is that right?
Yeah, and I mean, I think this related to the title of the podcast as well is how do you redefine wealth in your life and from a different perspective and not just a monetary aspect. One of the hard things for someone like me who's an introvert to do is to socialize. And I think the blue zones have shown this, right? One of the reasons why people live longer in these sites is they have these amazing interactions in multi-generational homes, or they have friends that they smoke and drink with that gives them this
Yeah.
access to longevity that they didn't
Community.
Yeah.
have.
Yeah.
And so that would be something to find a club, find a group of people that you interact with, find some friends that you can share things with, right? And these people then become your accountability in some way. They help you move through life's sort of stressors and things. And I've been, very fortunate to have work colleagues that we hang out outside of work with and spend time with. And these are individuals that have really been with me the last couple decades that you can share all these things that are happening to you that you're struggling with, and they help you get through this, which has
Yeah.
been amazing. So
Yeah. And
I
I
think
think.
that's a key feature. It's hard for a lot of people to do, but
Mm.
find your tribe, find the group that you can
Mm.
interact with, find the people who make you who you are.
Yeah, community. No, community is so important and on all of it, right? In healing, in optimization, in being a better human, finding the others that are
Yeah.
like us that we can share, stories and information and research with.
And when we do go through these sort of valleys, so to speak, our natural tendency as men is typically to sort of withdraw a little bit. We don't want to unload on people, and we want to seem strong and not dependent on people and not seem vulnerable. But those are the times where you most need that sense of community, where you do have other people that can tell you, yeah, I've been through that as well. And these are things that I've done to help me get through it, and to really reach out and to have people to really unload on. And that's a lot of what we do in some of these different with my coaching elements. I try to get them to find these these different communities of men that can then start to be a little bit more vulnerable with everyone. And I think that's where you see a lot of in some of these wellness retreats, they try to use this cohort design where you
Yeah,
find a lot of folks that are similar in what their
Hmm.
history is coming into it. And that's a big part of it, actually, not just going through the wellness retreat itself, but also afterwards and kind of going through a lot of the integration that really has a lot of the value post this, because you've gone
for
through
sure.
some of
Yeah.
these interesting and vulnerable times, and these then you sort of develop trust in these folks, and then you
Yeah.
can use that
No,
on,
I
on an
mean, this
ongoing
is why
basis.
these groups like masterminds and these other things work really well, is because they have that cohesiveness, right? This trust that you build in this community that you can interact with. And you can play off the skills and talents of those individuals. They can really help you advance the things that you're missing, and you help them in the things that they're deficient in.
Yeah. And you've seen some of them actually start to work on initiatives and new companies and things like that. Because when you find a lot of these folks that are like minded and you have that inherent trust because of what you've gone through, then you have a lot of confidence going forward that you can really be honest about what it is that you bring to the table with your skills and assets. And I've seen it time and time again. And then we have the wellness retreat that we're working on down in Mexico that we've told you about. And it's so interesting to see that dynamic change as they sort of come into the intake portion of it and how they come out of it. They're like you're talking about, their visage is different. Their shoulders are not slumped anymore, and they're coming
Yeah,
out, sticking their chest out a little bit,
yeah,
and they don't mind.
Bigger smile.
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly. So it's a lot of these things that just change your physical appearance, like you were talking about as well, because it's sort of that inside out approach when you've gone through a lot of these traumas and things that have been holding you back for a while, and when you've kind of unloaded those, and
yeah,
you have these tools like meditation, like some of these other functional wellness modalities, that's really helping you to kind of steer you correctly in your journey forward. And and I always talk about sort of our Western medicine mindset, coming into a lot of this, that hopefully, there's a pill we can take, or there's, these little hacks that we can have. And I agree with you. Sometimes they are shortcuts that don't necessarily help you to kind of do the hard work in order to get beyond some of these different issues that we're having. And I think, when you do start to think about it, well, I first have to do the work. And then there's some of these things that can perhaps help us along the way.
I mean, I'm a big believer in synergism. Throw the kitchen sink at it. Someone asked me at this. We had a Q&A after the premiere of Source, and they were asking about this idea of how do you combine things, right? A lot of individuals see benefit in multiple things, and so I use this religious joke to sort of illustrate this in a weird kind of way. There's this joke that this guy's in a flood, and the waters are starting to rise, and he's praying to God to save him. And there's this guy that comes by on a jet ski, and this guy's like, "Don't worry about it, God's got me, go save someone else." And then there's a boat that comes by, and the guy's like, "I've been praying to God, God's gonna come save me, don't worry about it, go find someone else." And then finally a helicopter comes to pull him off of this roof because he's at this little edge, and the water's rising. And the guy's like, "Go find someone else, God's gonna save me." And then he drowns and dies, right? And he goes up to heaven, to the pearly gates, and he asks St. Peter, I'm like, "I prayed and I'm a devout person, and yet God didn't come save me." And Peter's like, "I don't understand what you wanted God to do. He sent you a jet ski, he sent you a boat, he sent you a helicopter. What more could he have done?" Right? And so we have this mindset of what we expect and what we want. And
Expectations.
there's so many other things out there that we can throw at a problem to solve it. And we just have to be open to do it. And I think if you're suffering from a chronic disease, do everything you can. Use all the Western medicine that's available, because there is power in Western medicine. But then do these things that they call alternative medicine, which should really be medicine in general. Do these things like meditation and acupuncture and all these other things that give you modalities that have passed down through ancient wisdom that we tend to just sort of brush to the side as, "I can't believe that that's true because there's no evidence behind this." But there's lots of evidence in anecdotes and other things that come out, and now in real science.
Yeah. Well, I think it's always good to end on a joke, and so really, really appreciate the time that you've spent here, Hemal, and a lot of your work that you're doing right now is so important. Are there different places that we can send people in order to have better access to MeScreen and some of the other work that you're doing?
Yeah, so mescreen.com is a great place to go if you want to learn about MeScreen and get access to it. We can come up with a code for
Yeah,
this.
we can put it in the show notes. Yeah.
And
We'll
give
put it
them
in the show notes, yeah.
Yeah, we'll set something up, and we'll give like $100 discount on the test through this
Beautiful.
mechanism.
That's great.
And then if you want to learn like what you did with the documentary, go find Inner Science researchfund.org and get all kinds of information about what we're doing in the Joe space. And hopefully we'll see you at a Joe event. I mean, I can't describe what happens because it's mind-boggling. So the only way to really do it is to experience it yourself and see what you can achieve.
Yeah, I'm looking to do something this summer when I get a little time to spend, and really appreciate everything that you're doing right now, Hemal, and please keep up the good work, and we want to see more and better things from you, and again, really appreciate your time.
That was great. Thanks.
All right.
Dr. Patel, again, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for joining us on the Love You Wealth podcast. Thank you for everyone for joining us to this incredibly wonderful conversation. Wow, I'm really enlightened. What wonderful wisdom was cultivated. So again, thank you for everybody for listening and watching. And don't forget to continue to cultivate that wisdom, spread much love. And yes, today is the best day of your life.
Thanks, everyone.
Awesome.
All right, good.
Okay. So
I'll connect you with my social media person as well. So she'll start, once you get a cut done, she can start posting on my Instagram and other things to just get visibility.
Perfect. Yeah, we're running about a week and a half, 2 weeks behind to getting these out. So I should start editing it this weekend.
Is there a code you want to use for the MeScreen discount?
Want to do Love You Wealth?
Yeah, let's go. Let's go wealth. Let's go wealth. We go wealth, so it's easier.
Okay.
Yeah,
perfect.
We can do that.
I'll have them set that up, and we'll send you they can just use wealth in the checkout, and they'll give them $100 discount.
Oh, excellent. Awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Appreciate it.
Keep your app, or keep the Riverside app open until it finishes uploading.
Uploading. Yeah.
Yeah.
It should almost be done. It says 99%, so we should be pretty good.
Okay.
Awesome.
All right. And then
Appreciate you guys.
okay.
All right. Great.
Excellent. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks again,
All
Hemal.
right. Bye.